to my left, spatially, if not politically. And joining us now is Ari Rabin-Havt. Ari is the author of the new book, Lies Incorporated. He is a senior fellow with People for the American Way, and he is the host of The Agenda on SiriusXM Radio, which is must-listen radio. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, RJ.
Oh, listen, always a pleasure. And especially because I very much enjoyed your new book, Lies Incorporated, which I could summarize, but I'm going to make you do instead. Please.
The best way to summarize the book is to explain how I arrived at the book, which is I'd written a book on Fox and realized that Fox doesn't manufacture lies. Fox is a lie laundry. It's a lie amplifier, but they don't invent the lies. So I started getting obsessed with where do the lies you hear on Fox News, where do they come from? Who invents them? And I became obsessed with researching, thinking there has to be a patient zero for every lie. And when I started working backwards to find the patient zero of the lie apocalypse, I found that there was a group of them who were doing it for profit, both ideological and monetary, and were doing it intentionally to disrupt and distort our democracy.
So, in other words, that media purveyors of untruths like Fox, or political purveyors of untruth, who, as you point out in your book, by the way, often believe what they're saying.
Yes.
They're the distributorships, they're the distribution network, but where do these lies come from began to be something that interested you. You know, in reading your book, it struck me, Ari, that a lot of these lie manufacturers are lie factories I had heard of here and there, but I had never thought of them as a distinct category of profession. And I think that's what your book does. It basically says, no, there are people who generate untruths. There are a lot of them. It's a billion-dollar industry. So who are some of the leading examples? The
one that's most famous is Betsy McCoy, probably over the last few years, the woman who created the death panel lie. There's also John Lott, who is who's an econometric expert who came up with more guns, less crime. There's also broader categories of people. There are billionaires like Pete Peterson who fund and fuel lies, like the idea that about the damage that deficits do, which he did through funding this Reinhart Rogoff study that became infamous for being untrue and doing a tremendous amount of damage to world economies and to people because governments believe the lie.
Yeah, you know, I've written about Reinhart Rogoff. I've written about Pete Peterson many, many times, enough to have gotten 3 or 4 complaining letters from his press secretary. But it never had occurred to me to tie them together in a way, and also in the way that you have in your book, Lies Incorporated. Also, I noted, by the way, that you did not hesitate to be very direct in your language, which is one of the things that, you know, I felt made the book readable, was that you, I believe the first sentence in the text of the book is Richard Berman is a liar. Is that right? Is that the first sentence?
Well, the first sentence of the book is technically all politicians lie.
Okay.
Richard Berman, that's the first of the forward, which look, this is a guy, he's a notorious spinmeister. He's a notorious liar. He's so notorious, his own son, who was a minor but relatively popular touring musician with a band called the Silver Jews, quit music.
The Silver Jews? Yeah, I know those guys.
To fight his father.
Oh, really?
Because he became, I mean, if you look through the history of...
So if Richard Berman is Dr. Evil, then his son is Scott Evil, right?
I guess so.
Yeah, okay.
But if you look, like the tobacco industry, the food industry, when Herman Cain wanted to hire somebody at the restaurant industry to go after mothers against drunk driving, Richard Berman was the man to run a campaign against mothers against drunk driving. He ran a campaign suggesting pregnant women should, eat more fish because mercury isn't a problem. Like, that's the depth that this guy goes to. Yeah,
I mean, we can joke, but actually we're talking about human beings who are doing astonishingly evil things.
Yes.
I mean, that's the bottom line, is that the human cost of what they do is devastating.
Well, look, it's Reinhard Rogoff, we brought that up before. Governments instituted austerity measures based on this study, which put people out of work, which took people off of public assistance, which caused people to go hungry. You think about death panels. Oh, why does that lie matter? Why does it matter that 60% of Americans still believe that death panels exist? It matters because there are people who are not getting health insurance right now because they believe that a death panel is out to get them.
Right.
And those people are being hurt.
Right, and in some cases perhaps fatally. I mean,
Yes.
that's the bottom line, is that we're really, it's one of the things that bothers me a lot about the discourse here in Washington, D.C. sometimes, is that it gets very detached from the fact that people can die, people can suffer enormously.
Policy has consequences.
Policy has very human consequences.
And here's the problem, and I point this out in the end of the book. We exist in a city now where policy has become a game, where it's become a game by people who are paid to manipulate that policy, be they corporate lobbyists who victory is more important than doing what's right for, or these liars who those people work with to construct lies about public policy that distort our government, that hack our democracy, and that create a world that, frankly, people are worse off in.
Yeah, so, I guess I don't want to go too far ahead of ourselves. I guess I want to conclude with what people can do, so I don't want to go straight there yet. But
Okay.
let's talk about Lies Incorporated, this industry of lie manufacture by sector.
Okay.
In other words, you can break it out a little bit in terms of, well, there are healthcare lies.
Yes.
There are. Where did it begin? Let's take that. Who was the first guy to set up a lie factory?
What I go to John Hill of Hill and Knowlton. Other people go back earlier. I like the tobacco industry as kind of a patient zero. Some people would say, and I've received some had conversations about this since the book has been published. Look what William Randolph Hearst did with marijuana in the 1920s. That's very similar. But I like to put John Hill of Hill and Knowlton, which is still one of the largest PR firms in the world. John Hill was its founder. He, infamous, asbestos. You have something evil in the world, Hill and Knowlton probably represented it. You go back, the tobacco barons all met in the 1950s, and they got together at the Plaza Hotel because it was becoming more and more of a scientific certainty that their product caused cancer and was unhealthy. And that's why you saw tobacco companies start to advertise, Chesterfields are the healthiest. They started doing those.
They're toasted. Which was the one? One of them cigarettes. They're toasted. It made it sound as if it was wholesome.
Yeah. So you had this group of people. John Hill came in and said to them, "You guys, you can't be attacking each other as the healthiest. You have to deny that your product is unhealthy at all. And how you do that is you create an independent group, the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, hire some scientists, and start putting out studies that either distract or claim your product is healthy, and stop attacking each other for who has the healthiest product." Now, what was most interesting about this is John Hill knew cigarettes were unhealthy. How do we know that? Because John Hill had quit smoking 2 years before because of health.
Right, okay, well, that's pretty damning. We're talking with Ari Rabin-Havt, author of the new book, Lies Incorporated. Let's talk about that area of the lie industry that endangers not only human life, but potentially the planet itself. Let's talk about climate change.
Well, that's the big one
Right.
moving forward. I mean, and, a year ago, we had stories come out that Exxon, like the tobacco companies, absolutely knew in the 1970s their product caused global warming, and that global warming was going to be a planetary crisis. They knew this in the 1970s. They certainly knew it by the 1980s. Their own internal memos say that. And what did they do? They went out and funded climate deniers for 10 years. That's what they decided was the response. Why? And this is what's interesting, and climate is the prime example of this. They're not trying to win, RJ. They're not trying to convince a majority of people that that fossil fuels don't cause climate change. That's not their goal. And they're very explicit about it. I quote Mark Moreno, who's a climate denier. I quote Richard Berman saying this in the book. They all say our goal is to muddle the debate and keep us in a status quo. Because a status quo for them is a win. And that's what Lies Incorporated is all about. It's actually not about change. It's about keeping the status quo, which is why one of the questions I get from mainstream media about this book is, well, why aren't you talking about Democrats and progressives? When do they lie? Now, the book focuses on the last 7 years when a Democratic president
Right.
was in power.
Right.
So the forces trying to stop his change all happen to be conservative in business. I think there are other structural deficiencies, not deficiencies, but structural differences, let's say,
Right.
in progressives that would make Lies Incorporated's tactics not work as well. But climate change is the principal one where you go from tobacco to climate. And Naomi Oreskes at Harvard has pointed out the same scientists who were the tobacco scientists, a bunch of them ended up as the climate scientists, which is a direct
Doesn't
tie.
seem like the same specialty at all.
Well, that's one of the things you look at when you look at this. You see in Lies Incorporated, there are ways to tell something is fraudulent. One, is this the specialty area of the scientist? Or is it an engineer studying climate? At which point you at least have to give yourself pause. It's not a climate scientist, it's an engineer. Why is an engineer doing that? So you give yourself
One
pause.
of these guys actually is an engineer.
Yeah.
I think aircraft design or
Yeah.
something like that, and he's become a climate denier.
Yeah, a few of them are. Or
Yeah.
the other thing is, and this is Reinhard Rogoff, they won't release their raw data. You see that with a few of these people. They say something or won't release their raw data. The other thing is,
And with Reinhard Rogoff, just to interrupt you for a second, Ari Rabin-Havt, they did eventually release their spreadsheets, and a graduate student
Right, and that's
in
how it got caught.
Massachusetts found the problem.
well, it was a total accident because what happens is this graduate student got assigned a standard graduate school assignment, which is find a famous study and replicate it. And he went out and picked Reinhard Rogoff. Why? It was the most commonly cited, it was one of the most, I should say, commonly cited studies in the world at that time. So he went out to try to replicate it, and it should be pretty simple, he thought, because you have basically the study said if debt reaches 90% of GDP, your GDP goes down. So you know a country's GDP, you know its debt, you put it on a spreadsheet, you figure it out. He couldn't get it to work, and he kept trying, and his professors said, look, you're doing something wrong here, figure it out. And he ended up emailing the professors, the Reinhard and Rogoff, and saying, hey, I have this grad school assignment. Can you send me your spreadsheet so I can see what I'm doing wrong here? And that's when I think they said, oh, this is just some UMass kid. He won't figure out our errors. And he did.
They're hippies up there.
Yeah.
And in fact, as you say, just before we close off on Reinhard Rogoff, people were denied vital and continue to be denied vitally needed human services as a result of this mistaken belief that there's an arbitrary number. You have to cut off government spending. You have to start cutting government spending. So okay, you were walking us through it. We're trying to help inoculate the audience against lies. So people who are outside their specialty, one of the big climate deniers, I think he's backed off now, was a sociologist or something from Scandinavia at one point.
There's a few of those where you get like very strange. You're like, why is a sociologist talking about climate? You have people who won't release their raw data. With academics, you always put out your data. That's what they do because that fuels the debate. So people can say, look, I think your data shows this, not this, and have a debate about it. But if you won't release your data, which John Lott won't do, it says something. And the other big thing is if you've lied before.
Right.
And a lot of these guys are repeat offenders. Betsy McCoy, prime example of this, was the prime liar behind taking down the Clinton healthcare plan in the 90s.
Right.
And she pops up again with Obama. Everybody knew she was a liar. The reason she got media attention is because she was an exciting liar.
Right.
And therefore it was like, oh, exciting lies, press.
And she was a useful liar.
And a useful liar, yes.
And just to help inoculate our listeners against, McCoy is spelled McCaughey. In case people, just so that you know, when you see that name, Betsy McCoy, you are listening to a liar. So we're going to have to wrap up, but I guess I would close with this. Besides encouraging people to read your book, what's one brief message you'd like people to get as a result of hearing about this book or reading it?
Understand that our democracy has been hacked, that these people have found, like a hacker, hackers look for exploits and weaknesses. They found an exploit to our democracy. The only thing that can fight back is us fighting back with knowledge against them.
Perfect. Okay, well, with that, we'll have to leave it. Ari Rabin-Havt is the author with Media Matters of the new book, Lies Incorporated. Ari, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, RJ.